Technical Sergeant Claire Hawkins pulled into the Camp Pendleton parking lot at 5:45, her faded blue Jeep coated with a fine layer of California dust. The morning fog hung heavy over the coastal training facility, shrouding the rifle range in a ghostly haze. At 34, Claire had spent nearly 12 years as an Air Force combat controller before transitioning to her current role as a Special Operations sniper instructor. The Joint Special Operations Command had recently established this inter-service training program, bringing together elite shooters from across the military branches to share techniques and standardize advanced marksmanship training. Today's session would include a team of Navy SEALs fresh from deployment in Syria. According to the briefing she'd received, they were having trouble with long-distance target acquisition in variable wind conditions, precisely her area of expertise. "Morning, Tech Sergeant," called Corporal Rodriguez, the young Marine manning the security checkpoint. "You're here bright and early." "Best time to shoot," Claire replied with a slight smile, "before the heat messes with the Mirage." Claire gathered her equipment bag and headed toward the range office, her boots crunching on the gravel path. Inside, Major Peterson was reviewing weather reports for the day's training. "Hawkins," he nodded. "Good timing. The SEAL team arrived about 20 minutes ago. They're already setting up at Range 7. "Sir, I thought we were scheduled for Range 3 today," Claire said, checking her tablet. "Change of plans. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood requested the longer range, something about needing to replicate conditions they encountered in their last op," Peterson shrugged. "Above my pay grade to question it." Claire nodded, keeping her expression neutral. This wasn't the first time Special Operations teams had changed protocols at the last minute. As the only female instructor in the program, she'd learned to be flexible without showing frustration. "Any specific issues I should know about?" she asked. "Just that they're having trouble with the 1,700-meter targets. Blackwood said his team was missing shots they should be making. He wants you to evaluate their technique and equipment." "Roger that," Claire replied, though she suspected the issue wasn't technical. Long-distance shooting in coastal environments presented unique challenges that many desert-trained operators struggled with. The humid air and shifting sea breezes created conditions that couldn't be solved by better scopes or more expensive rifles. Range 7 stretched nearly 2 kilometers along the coastline, with target positions set at various distances up to 1,800 meters. As Claire approached, she could see 6 men in naval tactical gear arranged at different positions along the firing line. Their rifles, highly customized Macmillan TAC-338s, rested on bipods before them. A tall, broad-shouldered man with close-cropped salt and pepper hair paced behind them, occasionally stopping to peer through a spotting scope. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood, Claire presumed. His weathered face and watchful eyes marked him as a veteran of numerous deployments. "Tech Sergeant Hawkins," she introduced herself, approaching Blackwood. "JSOC sent me to assist with your training today." Blackwood turned, surprise briefly flashing across his face before his expression settled into professional courtesy. "Lieutenant Commander Jack Blackwood, appreciate JSOC's response to our request." One of the SEALs, a muscular man with a red beard, looked up from his rifle with a barely concealed smirk. "They sent an Air Force Tech Sergeant to help Navy SEALs with sniper problems." "That's correct, Chief," Claire replied evenly, having noted the rank insignia on his gear. "I specialize in environmental ballistics and long-range target acquisition." "No offense, ma'am," said another SEAL, this one younger with a southern drawl, "but we've been working these problems with Master Chief Wilson for weeks. Not sure what new perspective the Air Force brings to the table." Claire had heard variations of this sentiment throughout her career. Rather than engage directly, she turned back to Blackwood. "What distances are giving you trouble, Commander?" "Primarily the 1,700-meter target," Blackwood replied. "We're getting inconsistent groupings, even accounting for wind. Show her, Dixon." The red-bearded SEAL, Chief Dixon, settled behind his rifle, made several adjustments to his scope, and fired 3 rounds in quick succession. Through her binoculars, Claire could see all 3 shots had missed the center mass of the target, landing in a scattered pattern to the right. "Winds picking up from the southwest," Dixon said defensively, "shifting between 8 and 12 knots." Claire studied the range through her own optics, noting the way the tall grass bent at various points between the firing line and the distant target. The nearby ocean created complex air currents that many shooters failed to properly account for. "Mind if I check your ballistic computer?" she asked. Dixon hesitated, then handed over the small device they were using to calculate firing solutions. Claire reviewed the settings, noting several parameters that were misaligned for coastal conditions. "Your density-altitude calculation isn't accounting for the humidity properly," she observed. "And you're treating the wind as a constant when it's actually creating 3 distinct zones between here and your target." "That's what I've been telling them," said an older man who had been quietly observing from a distance. Master Chief Wilson, based on his insignia, was likely the team's senior sniper instructor. "Coastal shooting isn't like desert work." Claire nodded to the Master Chief, then turned back to Dixon. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to his rifle. Dixon glanced at Blackwood, who gave a subtle nod. Reluctantly, the chief stepped aside. Claire settled behind the rifle, making minute adjustments to the scope. Rather than immediately shooting, she spent several minutes observing the environment, studying the way heat waves distorted the air above the range, noting how the fog was burning off unevenly, creating pockets of varying density. "You shooting today or just admiring the view?" Dixon asked, impatience evident in his voice. Claire didn't respond. Instead, she made one final adjustment and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she could see her shot had struck the center of the target. "Lucky shot," Dixon muttered. Without comment, Claire fired twice more. Both rounds hit within an inch of the first. She stood and stepped away from the rifle. "It's not the equipment," she said to Blackwood. "It's the approach. Your team is using desert shooting techniques in a coastal environment. The air behaves differently here." Blackwood studied her thoughtfully. "You've made your point, Tech Sergeant. What do you recommend?" "Let me work with each shooter individually. We need to adjust not just calculations, but observation techniques." As the day progressed, Claire moved from one SEAL to the next, providing tailored guidance based on each man's shooting style. Most were receptive, if somewhat reserved. Only Dixon remained openly skeptical, treating her suggestions as theoretical rather than practical. "With all due respect," he said after another missed shot, "I've been doing this for 12 years, including 3 deployments as a team sniper. Maybe the problem is the range setup, not my technique." Claire maintained her professional demeanor. "Chief Dixon, I understand your frustration, but coastal environments require a different reading of environmental conditions. The techniques that served you well in Syria won't necessarily work here." Dixon's jaw tightened. "And how would you know what techniques work in combat?" Before Claire could respond, Master Chief Wilson interjected. "That's enough, Dixon. Tech Sergeant Hawkins is here at our request." The comment quieted Dixon momentarily, but Claire could sense his continued resistance. She had encountered this attitude throughout her career, the assumption that her gender somehow disqualified her from understanding the realities of combat marksmanship, despite her extensive deployment history as a combat controller. As the afternoon session began, Captain Reynolds arrived from Naval Special Warfare Command to observe the training. His presence added another layer of pressure to an already tense situation. The SEALs clearly felt their reputation was on the line. "How's it going?" Reynolds asked Blackwood just loudly enough for others to hear. "Making progress, sir," Blackwood replied. "Tech Sergeant Hawkins has identified some technical issues we're addressing." Reynolds glanced at Claire, then back to Blackwood. "The Admiral is expecting a demonstration of capability next week. We need this team performing at peak efficiency." "We'll be ready, sir," Blackwood assured him. After Reynolds departed, Blackwood gathered his team. "All right, listen up. We've got 5 days to master this. Whatever Tech Sergeant Hawkins is teaching, I expect you to absorb it and apply it. No exceptions." The men nodded, even Dixon, though his expression remained doubtful. As the day's training concluded, Claire packed her equipment while the SEALs cleaned their rifles. She had made some progress, but Dixon's resistance had infected the younger team members. Tomorrow would be challenging. Master Chief Wilson approached as she prepared to leave. "Don't take Dixon's attitude personally," he said quietly. "He's one of our best, but he's used to being the expert. Having an outsider point out his mistakes isn't sitting well." "Especially a female outsider," Claire suggested. Wilson didn't deny it. "That's part of it. But I've seen your record, Hawkins, combat controller with multiple deployments, distinguished marksman qualification. You've earned your place here. Sometimes earning it isn't enough, Master Chief. You have to re-earn it with every new team. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. True enough, see you tomorrow, Tech Sergeant. As Claire drove away from the range, she reflected on the day's challenges. The technical problems were straightforward. The SEALs needed to adapt their approach to coastal conditions. The human problems were more complex. Dixon's resistance wasn't just about her gender. It was about pride and the special operators' inherent confidence in their own abilities. Breaking through that barrier would require more than technical expertise. It would require an undeniable demonstration of mastery, something so compelling that even the most skeptical observer couldn't question her authority. Claire didn't yet know what form that demonstration would take, but she suspected an opportunity would present itself soon enough. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the coastal fog having retreated earlier than usual. Claire arrived at Range 7 to find the SEAL team already assembled, their rifles cleaned and ready. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood was deep in conversation with a new arrival, a tall, distinguished man with the insignia of a Navy captain. Tech Sergeant Hawkins, Blackwood called, waving her over. This is Captain James Marshall, Naval Special Warfare Group 2 Commander. Claire came to attention. Good morning, Captain. At ease, Tech Sergeant, Marshall replied, studying her with interest. I've heard good things about your program. Commander Blackwood tells me you've identified some issues with our team's approach to coastal shooting. Yes, sir. The primary challenge is interpreting the multiple wind layers that develop in this environment. Your team has been training primarily in desert conditions, where wind behavior is more uniform. Marshall nodded. Makes sense. I understand you were previously assigned to the 24th Special Tactics Squadron. The question caught Claire off guard. Her service record with the elite Air Force unit wasn't widely known outside special operations circles. Yes, sir, for years, including deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. As a combat controller, Marshall pressed. Initially, sir, I transitioned to advanced sniper operations during my second deployment. My team was frequently tasked with overwatch for joint operations. Marshall seemed satisfied with her response. Good. The Admiral wants this team ready for a joint task force deployment within the month. Their ability to engage targets at extreme distances will be critical to the operation's success. We'll be ready, sir, Blackwood assured him. See that you are, Marshall replied. I'll be observing today's session. As the captain stepped away, Blackwood turned to Claire. No pressure, he said with a grim smile. Just another day at the range, Claire replied evenly, though she understood the stakes had just been raised significantly. The morning session focused on reading coastal wind conditions. Claire set up a series of training aids, small flags, and smoke generators at various points downrange to help the SEALs visualize the different wind layers. Most shooters make the mistake of averaging wind conditions, she explained as the team gathered around a whiteboard. In coastal environments, you need to treat each zone separately and calculate their cumulative effect on the round. She demonstrated by drawing a diagram showing how air moving off the ocean created distinct current patterns as it crossed the varied terrain of the range. At 1,700 meters, your round will pass through at least 3 distinct wind zones. Each one imparts a different influence on the bullet's path. Chief Dixon, somewhat less hostile than the previous day, raised a question. How do you identify these zones without visual indicators like our training flags? Natural indicators, Claire replied. Vegetation movement, dust behavior, heat mirage patterns. Your spotting scope becomes more important than your ballistic computer. Throughout the morning, the SEALs practiced identifying these subtle indicators and adjusting their calculations accordingly. Most showed improvement, including Dixon, though he remained reserved in his interactions with Claire. After lunch, Captain Marshall returned with another officer, Rear Admiral Phillips, commander of all naval special warfare forces on the West Coast. Their presence instantly changed the atmosphere on the range. Gentlemen, the Admiral announced, I understand you've been working on some technical challenges. I'd like to see your progress. Blackwood quickly organized a demonstration. Each SEAL would fire 5 rounds at the 1,700-meter target, allowing the Admiral to observe their improved accuracy. The first three shooters performed admirably, placing most of their rounds within the target's center mass. The fourth shooter struggled slightly, but still showed marked improvement over the previous day. When Dixon's turn came, he settled behind his rifle with evident confidence. His first two shots hit the target center. On the third shot, a sudden gust of wind from the ocean caused his round to impact the outer ring. "Wind shifted," he muttered, clearly frustrated. "Adjust and continue, Chief," Blackwood ordered. Dixon made a quick adjustment and fired again. Another miss, this one even wider. "Something's off," Dixon insisted, checking his scope. "The wind can't be changing that dramatically between shots." Claire, who had been observing through a spotting scope, saw the problem immediately. A thermal pocket had formed downrange, creating an invisible barrier that Dixon hadn't accounted for. "There's a heat bubble at about 1,200 meters, she said quietly. "The air density change is affecting your trajectory." Dixon ignored her, making his own adjustments before firing his final round. Another miss. The Admiral's expression remained neutral, but Claire could sense his disappointment. This team was supposed to represent the elite of naval special warfare, yet they were struggling with conditions they might face in actual operations. "Perhaps a different perspective would be helpful," Admiral Phillips suggested, turning to Claire. "Tech Sergeant, would you mind demonstrating your approach?" Claire hadn't expected to shoot today. She had brought her spotting scope and teaching materials, but not her personal rifle. "I'd be happy to, sir, but I don't have my rifle with me." "Use mine," Master Chief Wilson offered, bringing forward his weapon, a highly customized Remington MSR and .338 Lapua Magnum. "It's zeroed for this range." Claire accepted the rifle, quickly familiarizing herself with its setup. It was similar to what she typically used, though with a different scope and trigger pull. As she moved to the firing position, she became acutely aware of the audience watching her. Not just the SEALs, but Captain Marshall, Admiral Phillips, and several staff officers who had accompanied them. The stakes were high, not just for her personal credibility, but for the entire joint training program she represented. 5 rounds at the 1,700-meter target, she confirmed. "That's correct, Tech Sergeant," the Admiral replied. Claire settled behind the rifle, taking her time to assess the conditions. Instead of immediately peering through the scope, she first studied the range with her naked eye, noting subtle environmental cues. The way dust particles moved in the sunlight, the bend of distant grass, the almost imperceptible heat waves rising from the earth. Only after this careful observation did she look through the scope, making minute adjustments based on what she had seen. The range had fallen completely silent as everyone watched her methodical preparation. Her first shot broke the silence. Through the spotting scopes, observers could see it had struck the dead center of the target. Without comment, Claire fired again, and again, and again, and finally a 5th time. When she stood up from behind the rifle, the spotting scopes confirmed what the more experienced observers already knew. All 5 rounds had impacted within a 2-inch circle at the center of a target 1,700 meters away. In variable wind conditions, with an unfamiliar rifle. Admiral Phillips studied the target image on the digital display, then turned to Claire. "Impressive shooting, Tech Sergeant. What did you see that Chief Dixon missed?" 3 distinct wind zones, sir, plus a thermal barrier at about 1,200 meters. The coastal air creates layers that require separate calculations. Dixon stared at the target display, his expression a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. "Could you explain your process to the team?" Admiral Phillips requested. For the next 15 minutes, Claire broke down her methodology, the environmental reading, the calculations, the subtle adjustments between shots as conditions changed. The SEALs listened with newfound attention, even Dixon. "The key is patience," she concluded. "You need to see the full picture before you take the shot. The coast doesn't give you stable conditions like the desert. You have to read the changes as they happen." As the Admiral and his staff prepared to depart, he paused beside Claire. "Outstanding demonstration, Tech Sergeant. I understand now why JSOC selected you for this program." "Thank you, sir. Continue working with this team. I want them all shooting at your level before they deploy." After the brass departed, an awkward silence fell over the range. Claire had just outperformed the team's best sniper in front of their commanding officers. a necessary demonstration, but one that had undoubtedly bruised some egos. Blackwood broke the tension. "All right, gentlemen, Tech Sergeant Hawkins has shown us the standard we need to meet. Let's get back to work." The afternoon session took on a different tone. The skepticism had largely evaporated, replaced by genuine interest in Claire's techniques. Even Dixon approached her with specific questions about thermal barrier identification. "That was some shooting," he acknowledged grudgingly. "Never seen anyone read conditions that accurately on this range." "It's just practice, Chief," Claire replied. "Thousands of hours observing how air behaves in different environments." "Maybe," Dixon said, "but there's also natural talent. Some people just see things others don't." As the day's training concluded, Master Chief Wilson approached Claire while she helped pack up the equipment. "You know, I've been running this range for 7 years," he said conversationally. "Never seen a group of SEALs that quiet after a demonstration. You made an impression today." Claire smiled slightly. That was the goal. Admiral Phillips was impressed too. He's not easily wowed. "I was just doing my job, Master Chief." Wilson chuckled. "If that's your just doing my job performance, I'd hate to see you when you're really trying to show off." As Claire drove back to her temporary quarters that evening, she reflected on the day's events. The demonstration had achieved its purpose, establishing her credibility with the SEAL team. But the real challenge was still ahead. Impressing them once was different from fundamentally changing their approach to long-distance shooting. That would take time and consistent results. Tomorrow would be another test, and based on Captain Marshall's comments about the upcoming deployment, they didn't have much time to perfect these techniques. The pressure was building, not just for the SEALs, but for Claire as well. She had proven herself capable today. Tomorrow, she needed to prove herself an effective teacher. By the third day, the dynamic had shifted noticeably. The SEALs arrived early, eager to continue their training with Claire. Even Dixon had set aside his initial skepticism, focusing instead on mastering the coastal shooting techniques she was teaching. "Morning, Tech Sergeant," Blackwood greeted her. "We've been discussing yesterday's demonstration. The team has some questions about your methodology." Claire had prepared for this. While her shooting had impressed them, these were elite operators who needed to understand the why, not just the how. "I've set up a progressive training program for today," she explained, distributing tablets with detailed diagrams. "We'll break down the process into components: environmental reading, calculation, execution, and adjustment." The morning session focused on environmental reading, identifying the subtle cues that indicated changes in air density, wind direction, and thermal patterns. Claire had the SEALs practice without rifles first, simply observing through spotting scopes and discussing what they saw. "Most shooters rush this phase," she explained. "They get behind the rifle, make a quick wind call, and shoot, but at extreme distances, observation is 80% of the process." Dixon, who had been studying a Mirage band through his spotting scope, looked up. "In combat, we don't always have time for extended observation." "True," Claire acknowledged, "which is why you practice it now until it becomes instinctive. With enough training, you can compress the process without sacrificing accuracy." After lunch, they moved to practical application. Each SEAL would fire a 5-round group at the 1,700-meter target, implementing the observation techniques Claire had taught them. The results were encouraging. Every shooter showed significant improvement, with most rounds now finding the target's center mass. Dixon, in particular, had adapted quickly, his natural talent enhanced by the new methodology. As the afternoon progressed, Captain Marshall returned, this time accompanied by a civilian Claire didn't recognize. A man in his 50s wearing khakis and a polo shirt, observing the training with evident interest. "Tech Sergeant," Marshall called, waving her over. "I'd like you to meet Dr. Alan Shepard from DARPA. He's here to observe our training methods." Claire shook the man's hand. "Dr. Shepard." "Tech Sergeant Hawkins," Shepard replied. "I've heard impressive things about your program. Captain Marshall tells me you've made remarkable progress with the team in just a few days." "They're excellent shooters, sir. They just needed to adjust their approach to coastal conditions." Shepard nodded thoughtfully. "DARPA is developing new ballistic calculation systems for special operations snipers. We're particularly interested in environmental reading techniques like yours. The human element is still outperforming our best algorithms in complex conditions. Claire wasn't sure how to respond. She hadn't expected her teaching methods to attract attention from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Dr. Shepard would like to see a demonstration of your environmental reading technique, Marshall explained. Something that illustrates its advantage over standard approaches. Claire considered for a moment. The best demonstration would be a comparative analysis. Perhaps Chief Dixon could employ standard calculation methods while I demonstrate my approach. Marshall smiled slightly. Actually, Dr. Shepard had something more challenging in mind. Shepard stepped forward. Captain Marshall mentioned you shot an exceptional group yesterday with an unfamiliar rifle. I'm curious how much of your technique relies on visual input versus intuitive understanding of conditions. Claire immediately understood where this was heading. You want me to shoot without full visual information? Precisely, Shepard confirmed. Would you be willing to attempt a shot with, say, limited visibility or time constraints? Claire glanced at Blackwood, who shrugged slightly, indicating it was her decision. I'd be willing to try, she said finally. What parameters did you have in mind? Marshall and Shepard exchanged looks. How about this? Marshall suggested. You establish your sight picture and make your initial observations. Then you'll be blindfolded for 30 seconds before taking the shot without further visual input. A murmur ran through the SEAL team, who had gathered nearby. What Marshall was proposing was nearly impossible. Conditions could change significantly in 30 seconds, and without visual confirmation, adjustments would be purely theoretical. One shot at 1,700 meters, Claire asked. One shot, Marshall confirmed. Demonstration purposes only. Claire nodded. I'll need a spotter who can confirm if conditions change drastically during the blindfolded period. I'll spot, Master Chief Wilson volunteered. Claire moved to the firing position, again using Wilson's rifle. The range fell silent as she went through her observation routine, taking her time to build a complete mental picture of the conditions. She noted wind indicators at various distances, the subtle shift of heat waves, the behavior of dust particles in the sunlight. After 3 minutes of careful study, she established her sight picture, making precise adjustments to the scope. Ready for the blindfold, she announced. Captain Marshall approached with a black cloth. 30 seconds once this is in place, he reminded her as he secured it over her eyes. In darkness, Claire focused on her other senses. She could feel the subtle breeze on her skin, could hear the distant rustling of grass. Most importantly, she maintained her mental image of the range conditions, calculating how they might change in the half-minute she was blinded. 15 seconds, Wilson called. Claire made a slight adjustment, shifting her position fractionally based on a subtle change she felt in the air current. 5 seconds, time. Claire took a slow, controlled breath, then exhaled halfway and held it. Her finger took up the trigger slack and then applied steady pressure until the rifle fired. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a burst of exclamations broke the silence. Dead center, someone called out. Impossible. Claire removed the blindfold to see the digital target display. Her shot had indeed struck the center of the target at 1,700 meters, despite the 30-second blindfold period. Dr. Shepard looked stunned. That's remarkable. How did you compensate for condition changes without seeing them? I felt the air current shift slightly on my left cheek, Claire explained. Based on the pattern I'd observed before the blindfold, I could extrapolate how that would affect conditions downrange. Dixon shook his head in disbelief. That's not training, that's some kind of sixth sense. It's not mystical, Chief, Claire corrected. It's just extensive practice. After thousands of hours studying how air behaves in different environments, you develop an intuitive understanding. The blindfold removed one input, but not all of them. Dr. Shepard was making rapid notes on his tablet. This confirms our research into expert intuition. The unconscious processing of environmental data exceeds what our current algorithms can achieve. As the group discussed the implications of the demonstration, Claire noticed Blackwood watching her with newfound respect. Tech Sergeant, he said when they had a moment alone, I owe you an apology. When JSOC assigned you to our training, I had reservations. Because I'm Air Force? Claire asked with a slight smile. That and Blackwood hesitated. Because I'm a woman, Claire finished for him. Blackwood nodded, having the grace to look embarrassed. We've had limited experience with female instructors in the teams. I questioned whether you could relate to the operational challenges we face. I understand, Commander. I've been proving myself my entire career. This was just one more demonstration. A hell of a demonstration, Blackwood said with genuine admiration. The blindfolded shot, I've never seen anything like it. Just remember, it's a technique that can be taught. That's why I'm here, not to show off, but to help your team develop these skills for when it really matters. The rest of the afternoon was spent analyzing the blindfolded shot methodology. Claire broke down her process, explaining how she built a complete mental picture of conditions and then maintained it even without visual input. As the day concluded, Dr. Shepard approached her again. Tech Sergeant, I'd like to discuss potentially involving you in our research program. Your methods could significantly advance our understanding of expert marksmanship. I'd be interested, sir, though my primary commitment is to the JSOC training program. Of course, we'll coordinate through official channels. Shepard handed her his card. Truly impressive work today. After the visitors departed, Claire found herself surrounded by the SEAL team, all traces of their initial skepticism gone. Even Dixon seemed genuinely interested in her techniques. The blindfolded shot, he said, shaking his head. How many times have you practiced that? Never with an actual blindfold, Claire admitted. But I've done similar exercises, shooting with eyes closed after establishing a sight picture, or taking shots after intentionally looking away from the scope for a period. Could you teach us that approach? One of the younger SEALs asked. That's why I'm here, Claire replied. But it starts with mastering the fundamentals. Environmental reading comes first, then the more advanced techniques. As they packed up for the day, Master Chief Wilson offered an unexpected invitation. Some of us usually grab dinner at the officers' club after training. You're welcome to join us, Tech Sergeant. The invitation represented more than just a meal. It was acceptance into their professional circle, something Claire had rarely experienced with special operations teams. I'd like that, she replied. Thank you, Master Chief. That evening, seated at a table with Blackwood, Wilson, and several of the SEALs, Claire found herself engaged in the kind of professional conversation she valued most experienced operators sharing insights without ego or agenda. Your combat controller experience, Dixon said as they discussed tactical applications of marksmanship. That's where you develop these observation techniques. Claire nodded. When you're responsible for coordinating airstrikes in complex environments, you learn to read conditions quickly and accurately. Lives depend on it. You see deployment? One of the younger SEALs asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. Sorry, that was. It's a fair question, Claire interrupted. Yes, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and several shorter deployments elsewhere, primarily embedded with Army Special Forces. Combat operations, Dixon pressed. Claire met his gaze evenly. Yes, Chief, combat operations. A brief silence fell over the table as the men absorbed this information. Female combat controllers were rare, and those with extensive combat experience even rarer. The blindfolded shot today, Blackwood said, changing the subject slightly. That's going to become part of SEAL sniper folklore, you know. The Air Force tech sergeant who outshot an entire SEAL team while blindfolded. Claire smiled. As long as the lesson behind it doesn't get lost, it wasn't about showing anyone up. It was about demonstrating what's possible with the right approach. As dinner concluded, Claire realized something had fundamentally shifted. She had arrived at Camp Pendleton 3 days ago as an outsider, an Air Force tech sergeant assigned to teach Navy SEALs. Now, she had earned something more valuable than simple respect. She had earned their professional trust. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The blindfolded shot had raised expectations, and the SEALs would be eager to learn more advanced techniques. But for tonight, Claire allowed herself to enjoy this small victory, not just in marksmanship, but in breaking through barriers that had nothing to do with bullets and targets. On the 5th and final day of training, Claire arrived at Range 7 to find the SEAL team already assembled, their gear meticulously prepared. An air of focused determination had replaced the skepticism of earlier sessions. "Morning, Tech Sergeant," Blackwood greeted her. We've been discussing yesterday's demonstration. The team has some ideas they'd like to explore. I'm listening, Claire replied, nodding the eager expressions on their faces. Dixon stepped forward. We were thinking about your environmental reading techniques. Could we set up a progressive training exercise? Start with standard observation, then gradually reduce visual input to develop the intuitive understanding you demonstrated. Claire was impressed. Not only had they embraced her methods, but they were already thinking about how to advance them. That's exactly the approach I would recommend, she said. Let's set up a series of stations with increasing difficulty. Throughout the morning, Claire guided the SEALs through exercises designed to develop their environmental awareness. They practiced making wind calls using minimal visual cues, identifying thermal barriers through mirage patterns, and predicting how conditions would change over time. By midday, their progress was evident. Each shooter showed significant improvement, with Dixon in particular demonstrating a natural aptitude for the techniques. You've got a gift for this, Chief, Claire observed as Dixon successfully completed a challenge that involved shooting after looking away from his scope for 20 seconds. You're integrating these concepts faster than most. Dixon seemed momentarily surprised by the compliment. Thanks, Tech Sergeant. Turns out I was approaching this all wrong before. Too focused on the technical aspects, not enough on reading the environment. After lunch, Blackwood gathered the team. Admiral Phillips and Captain Marshall will be returning for a final evaluation this afternoon. They want to see what we've learned. Claire sensed the tension this announcement created. Despite their progress, 5 days was a short time to master such complex skills. You're ready, she assured them. Focus on the process, not the outcome. Trust your observations. At 1400, Admiral Phillips arrived with Captain Marshall and several staff officers. Dr. Shepard from DARPA had returned as well, along with a small team of technical specialists. Gentlemen, the Admiral addressed the SEAL team. I understand you've made significant progress under Tech Sergeant Hawkins's instruction. We're here to evaluate your readiness for the upcoming deployment. The evaluation would be straightforward. Each shooter would engage targets at 1,500 and 1,700 meters, demonstrating their ability to read and adapt to complex environmental conditions. One by one, the SEALs took their positions. Claire watched with professional pride as they implemented her techniques, taking time for proper observation, identifying wind layers and thermal patterns, making precise adjustments between shots. The results were impressive. Every shooter showed dramatic improvement over their performance from 5 days earlier. Dixon, in particular, displayed exceptional skill, placing all his rounds within the center scoring ring at both distances. Outstanding improvement, Admiral Phillips commented after the last shooter completed his session. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood, your team appears ready for the deployment requirements. Thank you, sir, Blackwood replied. Tech Sergeant Hawkins's instruction has been invaluable. The Admiral turned to Claire. Impressive work, Tech Sergeant. JSOC made the right call assigning you to this program. Thank you, sir. The team was receptive to new approaches. That made all the difference. Dr. Shepard stepped forward. Before we conclude, Admiral, I'd like to propose one final demonstration, with your permission. Admiral Phillips nodded his approval, and Shepard turned to Claire. Tech Sergeant Hawkins, your blindfolded shot yesterday has generated significant interest. My team has been discussing potential applications for your environmental reading techniques. Claire waited, sensing there was more to this request than simple curiosity. We've set up a special challenge at the 1,800-meter position, Shepard continued. It's outside the parameters of normal training, but would help validate our research into intuitive marksmanship. Blackwood looked concerned. What kind of challenge, Doctor? Shepard gestured to his technical team, who had been setting up equipment at the far end of the range. We've installed a specialized target system with variable movement patterns. The challenge would be to engage this target successfully without direct visual observation of its movement. Claire understood immediately. You want me to hit a moving target while blindfolded? Not exactly, Shepard clarified. You would establish initial sight picture as before, but then be blindfolded for a fixed period during which the target would move in an unpredictable pattern. Upon removal of the blindfold, you would have 3 seconds to acquire and engage the target. The SEALs exchanged glances. What Shepard was proposing seemed impossible, even for someone who had demonstrated extraordinary skill. "Dr. Shepard," Admiral Phillips interjected, "that seems beyond reasonable expectations, even for an expert marksman." Claire considered the challenge. It was indeed beyond standard training parameters, but it addressed a legitimate tactical problem, engaging targets that appear briefly in unpredictable locations. "I'm willing to try, sir," she said finally, "though I should note this isn't something I've specifically practiced." Admiral Phillips looked skeptical but nodded his approval. "Very well, one attempt for research purposes only." As Claire moved to the firing position, she could sense the tension among the observers. This was no longer just about training. It had become a test of the limits of human capability in precision marksmanship. "The target will be stationary for your initial observation," Shepard explained. "You'll have 3 minutes to establish your sight picture and environmental baseline. Then you'll be blindfolded for 45 seconds, during which the target will move according to a randomized pattern. When the blindfold is removed, you'll have 3 seconds to locate and engage the target." Claire nodded her understanding. "Master Chief Wilson, would you spot for me again?" "Of course," Wilson replied, setting up his spotting scope nearby. Claire settled behind the rifle, a modified version of Wilson's that had been calibrated for the extreme distance. She began her observation routine, carefully studying the environmental conditions along the entire 1,800-meter course to the target. The challenge was significantly more difficult than yesterday's demonstration. Not only was the target 100 meters farther, but its movement after the blindfolding would introduce variables she couldn't possibly predict. After 3 minutes of careful study, Claire nodded. "Ready." Dr. Shepard personally applied the blindfold, ensuring she could not see anything. 45 seconds starting now. In darkness, Claire maintained her mental image of the range conditions. She could feel a slight increase in the breeze from the left, suggesting a strengthening of the coastal wind. This would affect both bullet trajectory and possibly the target movement pattern. "Target is moving," Wilson whispered, just loudly enough for her to hear. Claire focused on her breathing, keeping her body relaxed yet ready. The key would be maintaining a state of prepared calm, ready to act decisively when the blindfold was removed. 10 seconds, Shepard announced. Claire made final mental adjustments, preparing for the moment of truth. 3, 2, 1, mark. The blindfold was removed. Claire's eyes instantly located the target, which had moved approximately 20 meters to the right and 15 meters upward from its original position. In one fluid motion, she adjusted her aim, accounting for both the new position and the environmental factors she had been tracking. 3 seconds. She exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the range. For a moment, no one spoke as they waited for confirmation from the target sensors. Then the digital display updated, showing a hit just slightly off-center mass. The range erupted in spontaneous applause. What Claire had just accomplished wasn't merely difficult, it bordered on the seemingly impossible. Dr. Shepard looked at his data tablet in amazement. Direct hit at 1,800 meters on a moved target after 45 seconds blindfolded, with only 3 seconds acquisition time. The statistical probability of that shot is, well, I'll need to recalculate our models. Admiral Phillips approached Claire as she stood from the firing position. "Tech Sergeant, in 30 years of naval service, I've never seen anything like what you just demonstrated. Exceptional doesn't begin to describe it." "Thank you, sir," Claire replied, somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. "But the real achievement is the team's progress. They've integrated these techniques remarkably quickly." The Admiral nodded. "Indeed, they have. And that brings me to a question. Would you consider extending your assignment with Naval Special Warfare? We could benefit from your expertise on a more permanent basis." The offer was unexpected. Claire had anticipated returning to the JSOC training program after this assignment concluded. "I'd need to discuss it with my chain of command, sir," she replied diplomatically, "but I'd certainly consider it." As the official evaluation concluded, the SEALs gathered around Claire, their earlier skepticism completely forgotten. Dixon, who had been her most vocal critic initially, seemed particularly affected by the final demonstration. "Tech Sergeant," he said, "I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I made assumptions that..." Well, they were wrong. What you've shown us these past 5 days goes beyond technique. It's a completely different level of mastery. Apology accepted, Chief, Claire replied. But remember, what matters isn't the demonstration shots. It's applying these principles in the field when lives are on the line. Dixon nodded solemnly. Believe me, I won't forget. As the range was being cleared, Lieutenant Commander Blackwood approached Claire with Master Chief Wilson. Tech Sergeant Hawkins, Blackwood said formally, on behalf of the team, I want to present you with something. Master Chief Wilson handed her a small box. Inside was a Navy Special Warfare insignia, the famous SEAL Trident mounted on a plaque with a simple inscription. To Technical Sergeant Claire Hawkins, who taught the teachers. With respect and gratitude, SEAL Team 4. Claire was momentarily speechless. The gesture represented an extraordinary level of acceptance from one of the military's most exclusive communities. I don't know what to say, she finally managed. Thank you. You've earned it, Blackwood replied. Not just with your shooting, but with your patience and professionalism. You came here to help us improve, not to prove yourself better. Though you did that too, Wilson added with a smile. As Claire prepared to depart, Dr. Shepard approached her one last time. Tech Sergeant, whatever you decide about the Admiral's offer, I hope you'll consider consulting with our research team. Your approach to environmental reading has implications beyond marksmanship. I'll consider it, Doctor, thank you. Later that evening, as Claire packed her gear in preparation for returning to her regular assignment, she reflected on the past 5 days. She had arrived expecting resistance and skepticism, the same she had encountered throughout her career as a female operator in special operations communities. Instead, she had found something rarer, genuine professional respect earned through demonstrated mastery. The blindfolded shot had silenced the range literally, but more importantly, it had silenced doubts about her expertise and belonging. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Chief Dixon. Tech Sergeant, sorry to bother you. The team is gathering for a farewell dinner at the O Club. We'd be honored if you'd join us. I'd like that, Chief, thank you. As they walked toward the officers' club, Dixon seemed contemplative. You know, when I first heard an Air Force Tech Sergeant was coming to teach us coastal shooting, I had my doubts. When I saw you were a woman, well, I had even more doubts. I'm familiar with the reaction, Claire said dryly. But that blindfolded shot, Dixon shook his head in amazement. It wasn't just impressive, it was, I don't know, enlightening, made me realize how much I don't know, how much I still have to learn. That's the mark of a good operator, Chief, recognizing there's always more to learn, regardless of who's teaching. Inside the officers' club, the entire SEAL team had gathered, along with Master Chief Wilson and Lieutenant Commander Blackwood. As Claire entered with Dixon, they stood in a gesture of respect. To Tech Sergeant Hawkins, Blackwood proposed, raising his glass once everyone was seated, who shot blindfolded and silenced the range, and taught a bunch of stubborn SEALs a lesson in humility, Wilson added with a smile. As the evening progressed, the conversation flowed easily between operational stories, technical discussions, and good-natured banter. Claire found herself fully accepted as a peer by men who, just 5 days earlier, had questioned her very presence. The blindfolded shot that had silenced the range had done more than demonstrate extraordinary skill. It had broken barriers, challenged assumptions, and created connections between professionals who shared a commitment to excellence, regardless of service, branch, or gender. Tomorrow, Claire would return to her regular duties, but something had changed. The next time she faced skepticism or doubt, she would remember these 5 days, how initial resistance had transformed into respect, how demonstration had led to acceptance, and how mastery had ultimately spoken louder than any prejudice. In the world of special operations, respect wasn't given freely. It was earned through demonstrated capability. And in that moment, as she sat among the Navy's elite operators who now viewed her as one of their own, Technical Sergeant Claire Hawkins knew she had earned it in full measure.